This is Alicia Ruverall, and I'm with Karen Amspacher at the Corsound Waterfowl Museum in Harkers Island, North Carolina. And this is part of the Women's Leadership Project for the Southern Oral History Program. And today's date is April 25th, 1995, and this is tape number 42595 KA.1. Okay, so I thought maybe we could start with just sort of the basics of when and where you were born and how, what it was like growing up here on Harkers Island.
I was born on May 22nd, 1955 at Sea Level Hospital, which is not a hospital anymore. It's an old age home, but I'm real proud to have been born at Sea Level Hospital. My parents were living in Havelock at the time I was born, so I'd spent the first 15 months in Havelock. My daddy worked at Cherry Point, and but they built a house and we moved to Harkers Island in August of '56, and on family land that was part of the original 60 acres that my great-great-grandfather bought when he came from Shackelford. And my parents still live on that same piece of land. It's one of the few pieces in that, or what, some of the few pieces of the property that's still in the family's hands. Wow. Most of it's been sold out. But that's where I came when I was 15 months old. I don't remember much before then. And even before, while they were living in Havelock, they would come home on the weekends to work on the house and take care of my grandmama, who fell when I was like 6 weeks old and broke her hip, and they would come home on the weekends to tend to her. So I was always a part of Harkers Island, and went to school here at the elementary school. There was not a kindergarten at that time here. I started first grade here, and went to elementary school here, and then went to high school at East Carteret. And so this is where I've been.
Yeah. How far back do your family's roots go, if not in Harkers Island and the county as a whole?
My father's mother was a Guthrie, and his father, of course, was a Willis. And the Guthrie part of goes back to Diamond City. My grandmother was born on Diamond City, and she moved to Harkers Island when she was 12. Her father's name was William Henry Guthrie, and he is documented in Miss Leon Davis's work as one of the first to leave the banks and come to Harkers Island. His house is still standing. It's not in the family anymore, but it's still standing. A part of it came from the banks when he brought it. He had a brother that was Stacy Guthrie, who is noted as one of the last whalers. William Henry was the oldest of the brothers. Stacy was the youngest. Their father was Divine Guthrie, whose picture is in Archives and History. He was a whaler and a boat builder, and the community exhorter, EXHORTER, which was what the Methodist Church labeled kind of their resident preacher. He was like a justice of the peace. He could marry and bury and all that, because the church at Shackelford Banks did not have a preacher of its own. It only got preachers when one was coming through. And I've seen original baptismal records that go back to 1863, and the name of that church was Jones Chapel Church, and it was part of the Straits, which I think at that time was called Springfield Charge. In other words, they were under the Straits Church, and those baptismal records of Jones Chapel are included in the Straits Methodist Church records. So that when the community broke up at Diamond City and came, the majority of it, to Harkers Island, they brought that church congregation with them. And that was part of the Southern Methodist Church, and that was the beginnings of the Methodist Church that's on Harkers Island now. And the Willis side of the family, my great-great-grandfather on that side was Isaac Willis, and his wife's name was Angeline. And the cemetery, which is located adjacent to the land where my Guthrie grandmother's house was, she's buried there. In fact, William Henry bought that land from Isaac, so it's like he bought it from his future father-in-law. The two families were real connected there. So that was the Willis family. My mother's people were from Marshallburg, which is right across on the mainland. Her father was a Hill. We don't know very much about his. There's a lot of Hill families down in Atlantic, but I haven't traced it back to that. And all Mama says she asked Granddaddy where his people came from, and he said somewhere up North River, and that's all he knew. He just knew his father's and his mother's name. His mother was a Fulcher, and I understand that her father was an avid decoy carver and hunter and all that, but I haven't been able to nail that down.
Yeah,
And
neat to know that.
and then my grandmama was a Davis. My granny, she was a Davis. Her mother was a Lewis, and so it's all pedigree, Carteret County names. And I do not know. I haven't. I don't know where they came before they went to Marshallburg. The Davises. There were a lot of Davises that came through Portsmouth and Corbanks and Davis Island and all down there, but for the past 4 to 5 generations, that family's pretty much been settled at Marshallburg. And that's her house was her grandfather's house. He was Matt Lewis, and she and Granddaddy bought that house from her grandfather and grandmother, and I bought that house from Granny. So that's the house that my husband and I are working on. So,
wow.
So that's at Marshallburg, which is across the bridge.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's the family lineage.
That's
great.
It. Yeah. Well, now Divine Guthrie. So then you're related in some capacity to Divine Guthrie.
Sure, he was my great grandfather. 3 greats.
Wow. Yeah. Because he was in that part of that slideshow at the Heritage Awards as part of the history of.
That's right.
Harper's
That's
Island.
right. He is the oldest documented boat builder. He did the whaling boats, and I remember Uncle Stacy very well, which was his son. I don't remember my great-grandfather, William Henry. He was dead before I was born. I remember my grandmother. I was 12 when she died, and I was 18 when Uncle Stacy died. But I remember his house. His house came from the Banks. It was right across the road from my mom and daddy's house. It's been torn down since then. But his picture is in one of the 4th grade North Carolina history books, and it has a picture of the house in the background. But I remember him telling whaling stories. And and there is a videotape of him. It's some slides and some still photos that have been put together.
Right.
So that does exist.
Neat. Oh, go ahead and pause this. Okay, so continuing back. So then your heritage then goes back to roughly what year around here?
Late 1700s.
Late 1700s. Wow.
Yeah. The Shackelford Banks. Diamond City.
Yeah. Pretty amazing. A lot of history.
A lot of history.
Yeah.
Someday another project is to track back that genealogy further than that.
Yeah. Interesting.
The Guthrie and the Willis names, are just so rich.
Right. So what kind of work did your family members do over those generations up to your parents'
Fished and
generation?
build boats. That was it. My daddy's generation is the generation that steered away from that. Up until that point, it was boat building and fishing. You worked the water. You worked in the water, and Daddy worked in the water, and my uncles did until they opened. Well, Daddy went in the Army, and I'm not sure what the years were. I think maybe 50, because he was in Germany during the Korean War, and he was in the Army, and he came back and he worked in the water again until they opened up Cherry Point, the naval base, and he went to work up there. And he retired from there.
Where's Cherry Point from here?
34 miles west. It's a civil service, and it was like the biggest economic boom to this area. And
Sure.
he went to work there in, I think, 53, 54. And my mother worked there until I was born. But and to this day, the majority of the men on Harker's Island work there. That's one of the largest employers. But he did work. Daddy worked the water, but he hated it, and doesn't even own a boat. He loves going in the boat and eating while you get in the boat, but he has no desire to work in the water. It was just.
Why is that, do you suppose?
I don't know. It was just something that you had to do, and it was such hard work and um, no rewards. My daddy's father died when he was 9 years old, and my grandmother, her name was Addie, Addie. She was the Guthrie. She raised three boys and a girl by herself, and the oldest one was my Uncle Mac, and he worked the water and did what he had to do to feed the rest because he was the oldest. And Grandmama um, took in her husband, who was Isaac. My daddy's father was a cook at the Coast Guard station over at the Cape before he died, and she had started taking in washing and ironing for the Coast Guardmen. So after he died, he got diphtheria, and she had a 6-year-old son that died the same time. They died within 3 months of each other. She was still taking in ironing and sewing and stuff, and so she worked in the home and raised the family, and Uncle Mac went to work in the water, and they just basically lived from hand to mouth. And then Uncle Mac went to work as the bookkeeper for the REA, the EMC.
The rural electrification.
Right, it's still called the REA on Harkers Island. And that was in 1939. They brought electricity on Harkers Island. And he never finished high school, but was probably the smartest man I ever met. He was totally self-educated. He engineered all the electrical substations and the engineering work on Harkers Island, set up the accounting system that basically is still being used today. He was an artist. He was an electronics person. He could take a TV apart and put it back together. He was just very, very intelligent, and he made a career as the REA and retired as the manager of that in the early 70s. And then my daddy went to work at Cherry Point, and he stayed there for 34 years. And my other uncle moved to Portsmouth and worked in the naval yard there, and then he retired back home in the early 70s.
So that was a real turning point, I'd imagine, with
after the war.
After the war, was this area affected pretty dramatically by the war?
Yes, I mean there was Navy bases and Army bases at the Cape, at Davis Island. I mean we were right in the middle of the war here, and then after the war, the military influx had been so great during the war that a lot of it stayed with Camp Lejeune and Cherry Point, and there's a bombing range at Atlantic, and there was the Coast Guard station at Cape Lookout and the one at Fort Macon, so the military was a very big part. And after the war, a lot of that work turned into civil service work. So civil service was a big part of the economy here. So that, my aunt never worked. She lives in Beaufort.
What about your mom?
Mama worked at Cherry Point when I was born. She had only been there 2 or 3 years. Before that, she worked at social services in Beaufort. And she had graduated. My daddy and my mama both graduated from high school. Mama had taken a business course in Moorhead and had the opportunity to go to college, had a scholarship, but she was the only daughter in her family and was next to the oldest, and felt that it was her responsibility to help feed that family, because my granddaddy on her side, he worked in the water, and it was just basically living from day to day. And so she worked at the dime store and at the shirt factory, and then she got a job at social services, and from there she went to Cherry Point, and she stayed home with us. And she didn't work until after my younger brother was in high school, and then she went to work at the REA. She retired from the REA 2 years ago. So she was pretty much home when I needed her, and Daddy worked.
Yeah, wow. So how many siblings did you have?
I have one brother. He's 9 years younger than I am. And he lives in Raleigh now.
And what's his name?
Mark.
Mark.
He's Mark.
And is your maiden name Willis?
I'm a Willis.
Yeah, okay, great, yeah. So then how did you get to this point now? I bet that's a story.
That is a story.
What happened after high school?
Okay, I graduated from high school in 1973. I applied, and it was accepted at Appalachian, at Chapel Hill, and Atlantic Christian College, which is now Barton. and was talked out of Appalachian and Chapel Hill because it was too far away from home. So I went to Atlantic Christian for a year, and I was dating a high school sweetheart. Dropped out of school after the first year. Got married in November. We moved to Dunn, North Carolina, and to Whiteville, and to Rocky Mount, where he finished school at North Carolina Wesleyan. He finished in May and left in August, as the story usually goes. We separated on peaceful terms, but we got married for all the wrong reasons, and finally woke up to the fact there was no need of living together for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
So we called that off and chalked up our losses to experience, and I moved from Rocky Mount to Boone in January of '79 to go back to school and to do teaching. I wanted to teach.
Yeah.
And while I was working there, one of my work study assignments was the oral history program.
Oh.
So that was my first exposure to real oral history. My job was transcribing tapes with the foot pedal and the headphones and the whole works of graduate students who had gone out in the field of Appalachia,
Terrific.
And so I finally said, golly, you can do this for fun, I mean, this is how it's done.
Yeah.
And, but graduated from there in '81 and taught school in Asheville, in Buncombe County, because I didn't want to come home. I wanted to stay in the mountains. I loved it there. And taught there a year. Had come home after I graduated in spring of '81, came home to work that summer and replenish the financial stores.
Right.
And re-met Jimmy, my current husband. He was back in the county after an unsuccessful marriage in Greenville, and he had bought a house here on the island and had a sailboat. So we sailed all summer, and I worked at Belks and worked at Cherry Point that summer. And so the next fall I went to Asheville to teach, and the phone bills got too great, and
That's right.
and the gas bill was
That's
too
good.
much. So we got married the next Easter, and I finished the year in Asheville that year, and then I moved home that summer.
So when did you move home to Harkers Island?
I moved back in 1982.
Well, so you were away for a bit.
I was gone for 9 years.
Yeah. How did that affect you?
Greatly. It was hard coming back. Thomas Wolfe was right. You can't go home again under the same conditions. You can go home, but the rules are different. It took me a while to figure out that everybody that I left was the same. I wasn't. Because the majority of the people I had grown up with left their parents' house and went to their husband's house. There wasn't any time out on their own.
Right.
Very few. The ones who had gone off to school, there's very few that finished. A lot of people went, but a lot of them quit after that first year, just like I did, but very few of them went back. In fact, my original class at Harkers Island, because there was one class of everything throughout school, there's only 2 of us that graduated from college. A lot of people went,
Yeah. How do you think it affected you as a woman, going and being gone for years and getting?
Well, I think women, even the women who stayed on Harkers Island after 1970, the people that my generation, they're different from our mother's generation. But even more so if you went away, because the lesson that I learned getting off of Harkers Island was that if I wanted something bad enough, and I was willing to pay the price, I could have it. The people who stayed on Harkers Island didn't understand that. And I'm not sure that they even believe that now. Because there are so many things that men and women both on Harkers Island have wanted and have aspired to, but they haven't felt like they could do it. Because a lot of times they're not willing to make sacrifices to make it happen. And they don't believe in themselves, and they don't take the risk.
Yeah.
It's not a real risk-taking group of people. They'd rather have the comfort of, well, I know I can work at Cherry Point and make X amount of dollars, so I better do that rather than go start my own business and have the potential of X times 300,
Right.
but also have the risk that it might not work. So it's, and especially for women, the risk part, you know.
So then, how did all of that affect what you're doing now and how that whole process started? Big question.
Yeah, what I'm doing now really goes back, way back, to the fact of Uncle Stacy telling stories. I mean, I still hear that in the back of my mind, and I remember in the 8th grade, the first term paper I ever wrote was on Ocracoke. And I loved Charlie Webby's stories, and I loved listening to Granny tell stuff. I've just always loved the storytelling part, and that was the best part, was the people going visiting with Granny. We did a lot of visiting and just ate it up. I'm sorry that so much got gone, because I guess I thought it was going to be there forever, and didn't really understand. That was back before the process of oral history projects in 7th grade, where you go out and tape your grandfather or something.
Right.
But anyway, that's always been a part of me, and my concentration at Appalachian was social studies, and really loved the North Carolina history course I had to take. Went to Cherokee and did a slideshow and did some interviews. So, I mean, it was always a part of me.
Yeah.
And I always felt like that Harkers Island did not get a true billing, Harkers Island as such, and down east did not get a true billing when it came to the amount of talents and the potential that the people had. I think I realized that more after I went and lived in other communities. I guess one of the first and most obvious things was the singing, because my first husband was really involved in church music, so I ended up going to a lot of different little country churches, and nobody wherever I went could sing like the people I had grown up with.
Interesting.
Because the music on Harkers Island is just unbelievable, the amount of natural talent to sing and harmonize and play instruments. I mean, it was just in the blood of people.
Wow.
And, you know, always Harkers Island was given credit for being great boat builders, but that was it, you know. And so I immediately recognized that. And not only were people boat builders, but they were the engine people and the mechanical people and the electricians and everything. You know, not only did they build their own boats, they built their own houses. They did everything. You know, it was almost a shame to hire somebody to come in and do what you needed done. You ought to know how to do it yourself. So that independence was something I didn't see in other places.
Right.
Having been in Boone and had seen all these books that were being written and video, well, at that time slideshows and magazines and all this written material that was being done about Appalachia, and I would say, yeah, this crowd, they know what they're doing, but I can tell you, you know, I know some more stuff about this stuff. So, I mean, it was just a series of things that led to it. After I moved back home, I was teaching in Havelock. I taught a resource room for gifted kids there.
What ages were you roughly
6th, 7th, and 8th. Yeah. I taught 7th grade in Asheville. Taught 6th, 7th, and 8th in Havelock. Taught there 2 years and was pregnant with my first son, with Casey, and had always felt like, still feel like, that if you can stay away from starvation, you need to go home with your children. That's the way Mama and I'm so appreciative of that, and I think that's just really important. So I quit that job and came home in June, and he was born in September. And I had been home with him a couple of years, and the church here wanted to do a bazaar. Well, I had, because, you know, if church is a big part of the community. That's pretty much not only the spiritual fountain, but the social access. I mean, church is everything. And
is this primarily Methodist?
That's the Methodist Church. The Methodist Church.
Are there several on the island, or just one? Or
it's the United. Well, the Methodist Church on Harkers Island, there was a Northern Methodist and a Southern Methodist before 1939. Northern and Southern Methodist was two different branches of the same Methodist Church that had split over slavery. And there were two different divisions here, the Northern on Harkers Island, the Southern on the Shackleford Bank, so that when the crowd came from the banks, there was two Methodist churches. In 1939, they were supposed to consolidate, but on Harkers Island they didn't, it being the independent crowd it is. The Northern Methodist Church joined a Wesleyan conference, and it still is the Free Grace Wesleyan Church, which is a separate church from the United Methodist Church, which was originally the Southern Methodist Church.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a more holiness fundamental group than the Southern Methodist is like the same Methodist that was First Methodist in Moorhead, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, um, it's your basic
Right.
Methodist.
Right.
But that was the Methodist Church, the church we'd always been a part of, and they wanted to do a bazaar.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been home with Casey for about 2 years, and I was about to climb the walls. I was ready to
Mm-hmm.
organize something and do something. So we organized this bazaar, and we started on it in March. And this was back in the big craft age, where everybody was learning how to do all kinds of crafts. And I had made some real good contacts with people up in Havelock. We had the kids' parents and I had done a bazaar up there to go to Washington D.C. when I was teaching. So what we did, we organized classes, and I got a lot of people I had met through there and people I knew from all over the county to come and teach classes to our women on Wednesday morning. And we learned how to quilt, and we learned how to punch lampshades and how to do all this stuff. And then the women would buy all this materials wholesale, so that everything that was made in the class, we'd store it for the bazaar in November. And this was my opportunity to get a lot of the people in the church that I knew had lots of good talents for them. So I gave them assignments. Right. The men had to build quilt stands and stuff. And I mean, it was a major thing. I mean, it was so wonderful. And
was this the largest event you'd organized?
Oh yeah, and to that point, and this was before the Decoy Festival. It was like a big, big island event, and we publicized like crazy, and the people were lined up for hours to get in, and it was all going in an hour, and the church made $7,000, and everything was wonderful, and it was just a really emotional thing because we had gotten so close, and for the first time the crowd had seen, well, we really can do something.
Yeah.
We really, this. We've put every bazaar that ever was to shame. I mean, because we took the Sunday school classes and we organized it into the wood shop, the shell shop, the Christmas shop, the kids shop. We sold collards and sweet potatoes, and I mean, we had it was so much fun.
What year was this?
This was 86. And I love that bazaar. I thought we'd done just such a good job. And so that afternoon we were cleaning up, and I was already starting to talk about next year's bazaar. And somebody knocked me out and said, no, we're not ever going to do a bazaar again. We're worn out. And that just hurt my feelings so bad. And they've never done another bazaar. I worked them to death. And I think that is something that I don't understand, because they said, well, we've done a bazaar now. And they didn't want to do it again and do it better. Mm-hmm. And that bothered me a lot. It still does. I just have no patience with that, mm-hmm. because there certainly is a need for the finance. I mean, the finance part of it was minor compared to the need for the community and the pride and the fun part. Well, anyway, so they wouldn't even talk about another bazaar. But from that, the next January, they said, well, we need another project because we want to keep everybody together and keep the keep momentum, doing something, the momentum, right? But we don't want to do a bazaar. And so I said, well, let's do a cookbook. Because I had been stirring through the cookbook idea for a long time and had been looking at cookbooks, especially Past the Plate. There was one done at Sea Level Hospital, and I said, okay, all right, this is what we'll do. And that's when I introduced them to oral history, and we made a list of questions, and I sent them all out with their little tape recorders to find everything they could ever find about Harker's Island. And we contacted all the churches on the island and had them write their history. And we went to school teachers to get the school history, and we made assignments in all these different categories. And that was February of 87 we started that. And then I found out I was pregnant with my second child in May of 87. And I turned green and threw up all summer. And here's all these recipes that came from everywhere, and all these oral history tapes, question tapes and stuff. And so the cookbook, it was a miracle that the cookbook ever got put together. But we did it with a typewriter. We did not do it on a computer. So we typed all the recipes by hand and literally pasted it together. And because we had taken $1,000 from what we made at the bazaar, and that was our deposit with the printer. And we started taking it to the printer in sections because we got the recipe sections together faster than we did the history section. So I would just leave holes for the history based on what much I thought I was going to have. And I was supposed to be putting all that together, and I was dying with morning sickness that lasted all day. But anyway, we put it together and started collating because we didn't have the money to pay for the cookbook to be collated. So we just got pages printed. I picked it up in fish boxes every Monday and Tuesday from the printer, and we would put it together in sections, like page 64 through 110 we'd collate, and then we'd collate 215 through whatever. And we collated it in sections and bought, I think we ended up buying like 40-pound rubber bands to hold it all together. But that was the best part of it. That was the very, if I had it all over, we would collate that first one ourselves, because I learned that the collecting process was a group effort, but the putting together process was, that was my burden. And they didn't understand what I was going to do with it. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but they got so excited as the pages would come out, and as each little section would come up, because nobody knew what the other one was doing.
Now, who all was working on
These are the people of the church. It was men and women would come, and they would come to walk around those tables just so they could read the pages, because we had dug up such good stuff, and and I got to give the Lord credit. I mean, it just came from everywhere, and it just pieced together like a quilt. And like one of the pages that has been one of the most favorite pages is, you know, you're a Harker's Islander when, and there's a list of identifying elements there. Well, that was a page that I ran short of, and it was an empty page in the middle of the book, and I tried to think of something to go on that page, and I said, well, I had read that somewhere, I don't know, you're something, you're a redneck or whatever. So I just called around, I said, tell me what you think is the identifying mark of a Harker's Islander. So that was like a page that I threw together in 30 minutes, but it has meant so much to a lot of people. But everybody got real excited. And in the meantime, the News Times, we were running out of money for the printer, so I had contacted the News Times, and they came in and did a series of articles about what we were doing. And so we started pre-selling the book. And we kept telling the people in our church and all the churches on the island that they better reserve their book because they were going to all get sold.
Oh, yeah.
And so but nobody did. I mean, very few people signed up for the book because I guess I don't know, they didn't think it was going to be that good or whatever. The Mormon church did reserve 100 copies, and some of the people in our own church reserved some copies, but by the time we got the book, we printed 2,053 books the first time, and 1,900 of them were sold by the time we got the books. Wow. And we started collating the end of August, and then we would collate them all together. Then we took them back to the printer for them to put them in the binder, because we didn't have the machine to bind it with. And we started getting books at the end of October. It took us 2 months to get it all printed and put together. They were going within like 2 weeks.
Wow, amazing.
And I've heard people have told me that the night they got it, they took it home and read the whole thing and cried all night.
Oh.
And like I said, that was the best part. That it was not a Methodist church cookbook. It's a Harker's Island cookbook.
Why do you think the cookbook had that impact on people, that they went home and read it and cried?
Because they knew who wrote it, and it was not interpreted or analyzed or criticized or critical analysis or any of that. It was like sitting on the porch and somebody telling this and somebody telling that. And it was told by the people who had lived it. It was not a third person. And I think all of them had gone through growing up on Harker's Island like I have, where it was put down. Where I know a comment that came back to me from a girl from Harker's Island who now lives in Newbern. She says, for the first time in my life, I was proud to be from Harker's Island. And that's why it is the way it is. I mean, because for the first time we had joined forces, and so many people came to me after and said, I wish I had known what you were doing. I mean, it was only in the paper a million times, but after they saw it in print, they realized how good it was to see it in print, and that it was safe, and that it was not going to get distorted or made fun of or any of those things. So from that's where the mailboat that
Right,
okay,
that
so
newsletter, yeah.
that overspiel is what pretty much started the mailboat. But the cookbook was pretty much a life changing
Yeah.
experience for me.
How did things change after that?
Well, from that, the mail, the need for the mailboat became
Right.
obvious. Of course, the cookbook was published in '87. In '88, we worked it like crazy. I mean, we just, we sold like 10,000 books that first year.
Wow.
Because the church people were real excited, and we were making a lot of money. That was the year of Red Tide. We did a major food distribution with church money and all that. But
So there was red tide on the island?
the whole county, the whole coast of North Carolina had a red tide epidemic
Wow.
and there was no fishing, absolutely
Oh boy,
nothing.
that has been rough.
It was, and we gave away food for like 3 months.
Wow.
The conference helped us, but almost every cent we made from that first printing went into that.
To the
To the food
to
distribution.
the food distribution.
Right. So it was. But anyway, we made major contributions to domestic violence and did a lot of things that the church needed that the church would have never been able to do on its own. But after that first year, the interest among the church people, they were burned out with it. I had worked on to death, and so it kind of
working for one group
yeah,
to the next.
yeah, and so now at this point, which is what 7 years later, it's pretty much just a minor wholesale operation. We sell it to gift shops and all that, but it's not the active part like it was, because we were doing I mean, we went to every show. We were just so proud of it and all that. But I mean, it's still it's still alive. Jan Gillikin and I keep distributing it, and they'll do a couple of shows a year just for Christmas money or stuff
Right.
for the church, and I mean it still helps for things, but it's nowhere near what it was. We probably sell 1,000 books a year or something, maybe less.
But it sounds
So
like-
it's not the financial part of it.
Right.
I mean it's not worth the aggravation for what the church gets out of it.
Yeah.
But I won't give it up because I know it's good for the community, and it's too important, and it will become even more important.
Yeah.
10 years from
Right,
now is what it
exactly.
is now. I mean,
Yeah.
it's even more important now than when it was published.
I know.
So it's just a matter of keeping it going.
Yeah. Yeah. But it sounds like it was kind of a watershed for your growth in this whole process too, in terms of what it meant for you.
Oh yeah, I mean it.
Yeah.
I have not gotten anything out of it financially, but what I got out of it otherwise, it opened all kinds of doors, and it was my first experience in publishing. The only thing I wrote in the book was the introduction. The rest of it somebody else wrote, and I just pieced it together. But that's what I love to do. I love to edit.
Yeah.
I love to make a menagerie out of it, and so it was it was fun. And I think it would not have been nearly as good. I don't care who the best writer in the country was. It would not have been the same.
Right.
It came to me on the back of napkins and brown paper bags and Christmas cards and just little clips.
Yeah.
We sat around kitchen tables trying to make a list of all the stores that had been on Harker's Island. Nobody ever made a list of all the different stores.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was stuff and there are so many people who were interviewed for that book that are dead now.
Yeah. What happened to those oral history tapes?
I have them.
Good for you.
I have them. Karen Baldwin has them right now. She's transcribed them, but they're
terrific.
priceless.
Great.
Absolutely priceless.
Good.
And that was before the age of video camera popularity,
Right.
because we could have done it with video if we'd have waited, but I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
The words are there.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, so that was the beginning, and then that was 87 and 88. 89 was the 50th anniversary of electricity. So Travis, who's the manager at the REA, came to me and says, we want to do a booklet about electricity coming to Harker's Island.
Right.
So that was the next thing. In the meantime, I had done the calendar, the big scenic calendar, which is probably the best thing I ever had a part of, but major project. And when we were advertising for it, we put on the coupon about the mailboat. We sold the mailboat before we ever had one, and to see if there was any interest. And I had 54 people subscribe to the mailboat before it ever got put together. I mean, before it ever got put in a computer. Mm-hmm. So then I felt obligated. So those 54 people are listed in my files as charter members of the mailboat. And if it hadn't been for them, there probably wouldn't be a mailboat. Right. But I was obligated to them, and they had sent $10, so I had to do something.
Right, right.
So we did the first one in the spring of '90. Mm-hmm. And it's been an erratic pattern ever since, depending on how much time, because it's going to 80 pages now.
Wow.
So, and Joel and I work on it together, and so it's just a real challenge to get the time to do it, but I refuse to give it up because what it has done is provided a cookbook kind of medium for all the communities.
Right, right. Because you're getting contributions from people
from
all
everywhere.
Over. What counties mostly?
It's mostly Carteret County and Ocracoke, a little on the fringes, but primarily right here.
Right.
And we've got 800 and some subscribers.
Wow.
And I haven't worked it. If I could, because I've been so involved with this that there's just no time to give to it. But anyway, that all was coming about the same time that the Decoy Festival was. The first Decoy Festival was in 1988. In fact, and I was not involved with that in the beginning when it was organized. Wayne, who was the president, came to me and wanted some help with publicity for the first year's festival.
President of the committee?
The Guild. The Decoy Carvers Guild.
Yep.
He came to me and wanted me to help publicity. So I bartered with him that I would help with the publicity if he would let us come to the Decoy Festival and sell cookbooks. So that was the deal. And I was supposed to get a sweatshirt, and I've never gotten a sweatshirt. I still don't have a first-year sweatshirt. So he owes me. So that was, 1988 was the first Decoy Festival, so all of this was coming, it was cookbook and REA project.
One after the other, really.
And Mailboat and Decoy Festival. It just kind of all evolved together.
Wow.
And I did the publicity that first year, and then the second year we did the publicity. By the third year of the festival, Wayne said the guild needs a newsletter, because we've been promising them a newsletter for 2 years, and all I've ever done was just send out little notes to all the guild members, because at that point there was like 100 guild members or something, and it was growing. And I said, well, let's do a festival booklet. And that's when I really got involved, which was the third year, because I wanted to document, because I started to see the Decoy Carvers as something that needed to be written down. And because I kept asking questions that nobody knew. I had Neil Conley's book, the Waterfowl Heritage book, but there had been nothing written down about Carteret County Decoy Carvers, or at least nothing that I knew about.
Right.
So that first year program booklet, the brown one, was kind of a recap of the first 3 years of the festival, and it has Mr. Homer and Jewel and Roy, I guess is the third year featured carver. It documented them, how the guild had gotten started. Gerald Davis, who was one of the founding members who had died, there's a tribute in there to him. So that kind of brought the history of the guild together in that program booklet. And it was at that point that I really started getting involved with the guild.
Now, was that Fulcher Homer?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. And then also, what was the other?
Julian Hamilton.
Okay, Julian
Those are
Hamilton.
the two Heritage Award peoples.
Right.
Mr. Homer and Jewel were the first and second featured carvers.
Right.
So, at that point, the festival was really popping. I think probably maybe 3,000 people, 3,500 people, and they were getting educational exhibits involved, as well as decoy selling and buying exhibits.
Wow, so it's really expanding.
So it was really getting a broader spectrum.
Yeah.
It started with the children's decoy thing and all that kind of stuff. So, and at that point we started doing other festivals. We were being invited to come and do demonstrations at the Beaufort Homes Tour, the Wooden Boat Show, or the Seafood Festival, all that kind of stuff. So the guild first had an outreach program year-round into other festivals, and we would get invited to schools and so.
All around. Let me quickly flip this tape over.
Sure.
So we're continuing the interview with
Where
Karen
are
Amspacher. I think we were on, we were just talking about um, the Decoy Festival, and I think you'd said you'd been taking the cookbook to like the Wooden Boat Show and the Seafood Festival and all of that. So we were right at the festival and your involvement in it.
Yeah, with the third year when we did the program book,
Right.
and okay. At that point, or all during the process of the guild forming, and every now and then somebody would say something. We need a museum. We need a museum. A lot of the local carvers had been to Chincoteague, Virginia, and seen the small museum that's there, and they thought that was wonderful. The Chincoteague decoy influence was real great with the festival too, because a lot of the carvers here would go and do that show, and also Currituck and Currituck, North Carolina, and the Currituck group had a project for a museum. They had bought a piece of land, and so it seemed like that was the natural evolution of things, that you form this guild, you have a show, you build a museum. Anywhere, that is a permanent contribution to preserving decoying. So they started talking museum, and talked it. Like I said, all along until after the festival in 1991. It was the winter of 1992, and the guild board said to Billy Smith, who was a member of the guild and a prominent fish dealer, decoy collector, native Atlantic person, former chairman of the county commissioners, very, very successful person. We want a museum, and we don't have the sense or the power or the financial resources to put together something like this. Billy, we need you to put together a board, because they had looked into the fact that it have to be a separate organization, because the guild was pretty much a trade organization. This would need to be a 501c3, which is the nonprofit, so it'd be tax deductible and all that. So Billy said to me, well, I'll do it if you'll be the secretary. And so Billy sat down and put together a board based of business people across the county, because up until then, the only involvement that had been in the Decoy Festival were carvers, down east carvers. And so the first museum board included business people from all over the county who had an interest in hunting or down east or whatever. I mean, it's a very carefully selected group of people, terrific potential group. And that board's pretty much stayed in, the core of that group has pretty much stayed intact through several annual meetings and board members voting off and voting on. It's pretty much still Billy's group of business associates that's done it. That was in 1992 that the board, March of 1992, the board first met. We filed all our papers. We started taking contributions in August of that year at the Fish Fry. That year at the festival, during that process, we approached the Park Service about the land, because in the first meeting we said, there's no way we can raise enough money and build a building at the price land is in Harkers Island.
Right.
And I had become familiar with the graveyard, the Atlantic Project, where they had leased the property from the Park Service.
Right.
And so we got to investigating kind of undercover and looking at what they had done there, and everybody knew about the old willow pond that was on that property. We said, look, this could be. And we called some people at Ducks Unlimited to see if that would be a possibility. And so then we said, okay, here is land that they don't need. It's federal land, which technically means it's ours. This is a new way of Park Service development, because the federal government does not have money to go and develop resources on parks. Let's approach them. So we did in May of that year, and they told us that we would have to do a feasibility study. And the Park Service whole issue here is a very controversial one.
Yeah.
I think they thought that was going to deter us. We didn't have any money at that point except what we had made at the festival the year before, and we did our prospectus ourselves.
That's good.
Ourselves,
Yeah.
we got copies of everybody else as we did it, and we presented it to them in May. No, that's wrong. In August. We met with them in May. We did it together. We presented it to them in September. I worked on it that summer, and we presented it to them.
And what year was this?
This was 92. And they hummed and hawed and hummed and hawed, and we could not get any straight answer out of the local Park Service. So that was when we went to our congressman, and we went to Martin Lancaster's office, through Beverly Perdue and Ronnie Smith, our state legislators, and Martin Lancaster's office gave us immediate attention, and they came and got involved in it, and we struggled through this whole process until the next fall we finally got the paper
Wow.
signed.
Wow.
So it was a major accomplishment, and a lot of local people are still very hesitant to believe that it'll ever happen just because the Park Service is involved. But anyway, that was 92. Then we got the land in 93. In the meantime, we said we've got to get this out of Karen's garage and her kitchen table, because that's pretty much where it's being run out of, in Carl's garage and Wayne's. So we started looking for a place to open up a temporary office. So this building used to be a doctor's office. It was empty. We approached the rescue squad, and they gave it to us, or offered $1 a year, that's what we pay.
Great.
And we cover all the expenses, and we've put quite a amount of work in it. And we've been here since May of 93, operating here.
And how many folks work here?
Have 2 full-time and 1 part-time now. When they opened the office, that's when I started getting a part-time. I had gotten nothing before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they put me part-time, and then they hired Nancy part-time last spring, and then this past January they put me full-time, and they hired Tracy full-time. Now she's primarily geared toward the capital campaign, and the rest of it's all done with volunteers.
And their last names, Nancy and Tracy?
Nancy Davis, Tracy Lewis.
And you also mentioned Carl and Wayne.
Carl Huff, and Wayne Davis again,
Yeah.
the same
Okay.
Wayne.
Okay.
And so it's pretty much what we've done so far has been a volunteer effort. Even, like I said, up until January this year, they made me full time because,
Wow.
it just had to be, because
Yeah,
it
to make it
had gotten past the point that I could give anymore.
Yeah.
And my plan when I quit work 11 years ago was to come home, when the children went to school, then I would go back to work. Well, Katie'd been back to school 2 years, and I still hadn't gone to work.
Right.
So, I discussed it with the board, and they said, we
Yeah.
understand this, and this is the way it's got to be. I'm sure that if I had
Yeah.
continued to work free, that they would have taken complete
Yeah.
advantage of it.
Has that helped or made a difference for you, the fact that you're literally now paid, I don't know what your title is, like
supposed to be
secretary
a
treasurer, but
I
you're
was
functioning
for
as
the
a director.
from the corporate part. I was originally the secretary and
Right.
treasurer, but I'm not anymore. That's all being given to other people.
Okay,
so
so
now I'm
that-
supposed to be the director.
Right. Great.
I told them. They one
I
said
thought you were director.
they said we're going to call you executive director. I said, does that mean I have to wear shoes to work? They said yes. I said, well, I don't want to be executive director because this
Too high a price.
I can't deal with that. Not
Yeah.
sometimes. But I was supposed to be the director.
Yeah. Great.
Which also means you get to cut the grass and pull the weeds and clean the bathrooms and all that. But I mean, I've tried to overcome that.
Yeah.
I wish I didn't need the money. I wish that
Right.
I wish I could just be another volunteer, because I think, for some people it's been a problem. Here she is, she's getting paid to do this, let her do it. But I feel like everybody who's close to this project, has been a part of it, understands that, and I really don't feel any resentment from the people who really matter.
Good.
I'm sure the people from a distance have a problem with it, but there's, I've just got such a good group of people. I mean, we have our moments, but I think I've proven to them what my commitment
Right.
is, and
Right.
and they bail me out of the scrapes I get us in,
Yeah.
and I do get us in some,
Yeah.
like the history museum opening with no water,
Yeah.
the float tank with no water.
Oh, was this with the history museum when
Uh-huh.
we came up?
Yeah, they wanted
Yeah.
float tank, no water. Took 2 days to get water. We said next time we'll bring our own.
That's right. Poor Karen.
I'm not used to things taking that long.
Oh yeah, with the festival having to get that.
Yeah,
lined up,
I think, and this is, I think it's what's been an important part of what we've done so far, and this has been true with the cookbook or the mailboat or anything we did.
Right.
We didn't know we couldn't,
Right.
and for the most, I'm dealing with business people who see something they want and they could get it, and we don't have, with the exception of the Park Service, it's not been a long. We've made things happen. I know in talking with George Holt with the Pottery Museum.
Right.
when I tell him all the things that we've accomplished, he can't quite believe it. But we don't go through the government hierarchy, and I think that has been a part of our success. We would like to hope to think that we can raise enough money to build this museum without state money, because we don't want the strings attached. We feel like that it will mean more to us if we work for it.
Right.
Like I said, I don't know if the economics will let us because of,
Right.
but the whole project has been a reflection of the independent spirit this whole thing's about anyway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been our attitude. Well, we're going to do it because nobody's told us we can't, and even if you told us we wouldn't believe it. We're just going to do it.
That's great.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I like that part of it.
Yeah.
It's like, because the Park Service is still thoroughly convinced that we'll never do it.
Well, you said earlier about how the community members, because the Park Service was involved, seemed skeptical. What's the story behind that?
Well, there's a very strong animosity local toward the Park Service. I have as much to say about them as anybody, and I don't care if that does go on record.
Right.
They know exactly. I mean, and this goes back to when the Park Service came in, the way it was handled, the taking of the camps over at Shackleford Banks, which is another 3-hour story.
Yeah.
Just the way they do things. It is totally a closed society. They have no respect, consideration, or interest in the local people, and they've done nothing to repair the damage that's been made. And the thing that the legislators presented to them with our project was, okay, here's a way for you to bridge a very wide gap to the community.
Right.
But so far, they've agreed to nothing. That they have not been forced to agree politically.
Wow. So what is the status right now with the museum effort?
We have our lease from the Park Service. We have the agreement of Ducks Unlimited to come in and restore the pond area, which we feel is one of the biggest assets of that piece of property. We are in the process of organizing and getting ready to implement a capital campaign to raise the money. The pond work, the money is allocated with DU, and the plans are in place. Right now we have to submit an environmental assessment to the Park Service, which we got our final draft on that today. And that has to be cleared through Atlanta, which is the regional office. All of that has to be cleared before we can do anything on the property.
Where's the property located?
On the east end of the island. It's about 2 miles down the road.
And roughly, what amount of acreage?
16 acres.
Yeah.
16 acres, and about 3.5 of it is pond. So we're real anxious to get that pond underway. It's going to have to all be hand cleared and all that, but we can't do anything until that environmental assessment. Now, after that assessment's done, there might have to be some other things. We have had soil people, forestry people, chemical engineers, everybody and their brother has come and looked at it, and everything seems to be clear so far. We've also applied for our septic tank permit, and we're waiting. We had to get our architectural drawings, that's what we did last year. That was about a $50,000 project there to get the drawings and the schematics and all that. So now that we've got our building, now we have to engineer the septic system.
Right.
And they have to design a septic system, and we're going to, as soon as we get that permit, we're going to go ahead and put the septic system in, because that's a real issue here. We want that in the ground before we ever.
Low-lying water areas.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and for a facility that large, so far everything looks clear, but it depends on what the engineering thinks. So that's in the works. It's just so technical. It's not mine.
Well, but what's amazing to me is it sounds, you make it sound easy, and yet I know that all of those steps, I mean, even just getting the prospectus written, or getting these permits, for
It's been a meeting after meeting
environmental
after
stuff.
meeting. There's been 5 million meetings trying to coordinate people. And so far we've come out okay on all of it, right? Like I said, right now the environmental assessment is critical.
Yeah.
And that's required of any project on federal property.
Right.
And there's a certain amount of it that would be required if it was on our own property. But the local people just do not believe, that the Park Service is going to let us have something we want. It gets back to this "I can't have what I want" syndrome, But this is the way of the Park Services. I was up at Hatteras last Friday, and they had the same document, memorandum of understanding with Cape Hatteras, and
Right.
Private projects go in on federal property all the time, and that's the only way that they can get new facilities is for groups to come in and do it. So you just got to believe past today.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, actually. Well, what's it been like, and we talked about this a little bit beforehand, what's it been like as a woman working in this community and sort of trying to spearhead this effort?
This gets back to some study that Carmine Prioli's doing. I think I've mentioned that to you before too. Women on Harker's Island I don't think have ever been the lay down play dead kind. The women were always real active in the church, and I don't think there's a church on Harker's Island that's not run by women. Now it might look like there's a man on the board, but there's a wife behind it. I mean that's just the way it's done. The school, there were no men teachers in the schools when I came. There was a woman principal, and all the teachers were women. The oldest motel on Harker's Island was Harker's Lodge, and that was run by a woman. A big part of the businesses on Harker's Island was women.
Now, why do you suppose that? Because that's not typical of all areas. Even just looking at teachers.
Because the men were going fishing. The men were gone, and the women handled it. The women were the midwives. I don't know of a woman that ever run the mail boat.
So there might be a gender distinction.
There's been a strong history of women postmistresses. A lot of women have owned stores, have owned businesses on the island. So women were always leaders. The first history that was done of Harker's Island was done by Miss Lillian Davis. So it wasn't unusual that women were the ones that did it. The project to save the cemetery from, Harker's Point Cemetery, that's Sharon Piner, that was a woman. The women are active in the rescue squad. I don't know, Mr. Earl Davis, who was the one who was the leader in getting electricity. And so I guess it was when things went off the island, men had to take the leadership, maybe. I've never really thought about it, but here on the island it was not unusual for a woman to take a hold of something and move with it. Right. There have been situations where I know I would have been treated different in the position I'm in if I had been a man. I mean, I'm sure that they would have been more anxious to pay me because they would have felt like I had a family to feed. But when I told them that I had gone as far as I could go, they respected that and they dealt with it. There's only 2 other females on the board of 23, so it's primarily a man but they follow where I lead.
Who's the other woman on the board?
Valerie Stein and Jean Preston, who is our state legislator. And Tabby Nance, I'm sorry, so that makes 3 more. But 2 of those just came on. For the most part in the beginning, well, Valerie wasn't even on it in the beginning. I guess we all came on. She came on as treasurer, and now somebody else is treasurer, and she's on the board. But I've tried not to look at it as being female in this job.
Why not?
I wasn't conscious of it.
So you mean it wasn't that you were intentionally trying not to think that way? You just didn't.
I just didn't think about it.
I see. Okay.
And there have been relationships I know that would be different. Some that we've talked about before.
Right.
If I was male.
Right.
But I feel like that's their problem. Now the guild board is a little different. The carvers themselves, because they feel like that, but I think the stigma there, or the differentiation, is I'm not a carver.
Okay, right.
Because there is a female carver on that board.
Are there many women decoy carvers?
More so.
Huh.
Traditionally they painted decoys, but now there are women who carve and run the tools and do all that.
Yeah. Was there a history of women in the fishing industry here?
Yes, not net fishing,
right,
but clamming and oystering. My grandmother in Marshburg picked crab meat. They were in the supportive roles, and they clammed and they did what they could do on the shore. I don't know of a whole until the past 20 years, I don't know of a whole lot of females that were captains of boats
Right.
or leaders of boats.
Right.
When they went out fishing, that was primarily men. I don't remember in anything I've seen any women being a crew on a boat.
Right. Because I know up in the Chesapeake when I was doing work up there in Virginia, there would be like husband-wife teams as crabbers, for instance. You know, that they'd go out as a team, but it was not very common for a woman.
The women here open scallops mainly. That was
So mostly on the processing.
right. They opened scallops. They picked crab meat. They shucked oysters. They tended clam beds. People bedded their own clams. They run the peeler. Worked the peeler pots in the spring.
And was
Mended net. My grandmother knitted net in a WPA project. They had a little store here that they turned into a WPA project, and they knitted basketball nets. And I've tried to track down some of that stuff.
right.
But women knitted net, and
Interesting. Yeah.
they made sails.
Uh-huh.
They
Yeah.
did all the supportive stuff. But women have always worked,
Yeah.
inside or outside. I mean, they worked wherever it took.
Yeah.
They ran the stores, and the wives run the stores, and the men go fishing.
Yeah. And those, you were just mentioning shrimping and crabbing and clamming and oystering. Those were the primary fishing traditions, right?
Well,
Or was-
shrimp is just a new phenomenon. Used to, they threw shrimp away. They hated shrimp. They called them bugs because
Right.
it tore up their net.
Right.
Um,
in recent years.
The mullet fishing and menhaden fishing, and
Were there many Harkers Island folks in Manhattan?
the first menhaden plant was on Harkers Island.
Right. Oh wow. Great.
So there were people involved in it, not in later years, but in the beginning. Harkers Island's fishing was mostly primarily private boats, families, brothers, sons and fathers. They had their little family operations. There's a listing in one of the mail boats of the crews. There were families, and like the Rose family had their crew, their boats and their crews and stuff.
Right. But women weren't involved in Manhattan here
Uh-uh.
because they weren't up in Virginia.
No,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
man's work.
Right. But weren't most of the Harkers Island fishermen those local family based?
Yes.
Yeah. So then women would have kind of an integral role in that.
That's right. That
Right.
they would, when they come to the docks, they'd help cull. I used to go shrimping with my Uncle Willie, and we culled. And a lot of times, like just for inside fishing, like channel netting or something, the
Right.
wives would go with their husbands.
Yeah.
But they were not the leaders in those roles. But when it came to the social functions, women were there. So I haven't.
So you saw a lot of that growing up.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't thought any of it, and I don't really. There's a few confrontations I've had with, and it's been more or less personality conflicts more so than male-female things along the way
Yeah.
that didn't appreciate aggressive females
Right.
wanting
Right.
something. So I don't know if this would have been accepted 30 years ago or not.
You being a woman. Doing
Yeah.
what you're doing. Yeah.
I don't know that we were ready for it 30 years. I don't know that people would have felt so threatened that they're willing to support it now. I don't know that they would have felt that way 30 years ago. I don't think the cookbook would have been as well received 20 years ago as it is now, but now they can go to Ocracoke or they can go to Slaughter Path and they can see what's happened to other communities, and so it doesn't take a whole lot of vision to put Harkers Island in the same category, and already what we've seen over here.
Yeah.
So it's a very real threat, and it's obvious enough so far that it's not hard to convince people that it needs to be done.
Yeah. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the goals of the museum. I know that's outlined a little bit, obviously in the prospectus and whatnot. But what's driving you to do what you're doing?
For some people, well, I think the museum is different things to different people. There are some people who look at it as primarily a promotion and a source for decoy carvers alone. Those of us who are at the leadership roles of it see it and understand it as something larger. And we're trying to educate the community that you may not carve and you may not sell a decoy, you may not collect decoys, but this is about a heritage and a culture. And I tell people that decoys are the excuse and Down East heritage is the reason. Because decoys are just a symbol of something else. I mean, I had no knowledge or no interest in decoys as such, and probably still wouldn't, except I know the people behind them and the stories behind them. So I think if we were trying to sell or promote or build a museum that was primarily a place for decoy carvings and a place to carve, that would be too tunnel visioned. Decoy carving was no more a part of this community than hanging net or net needles or quilting or preserving or salting mullets or boat building or any of those things. It just happens that decoy carving is the spotlight. But the bigger story for me, my is that it was based on a group of people who survived, and because living out here was not easy for men or women or children, and decoy carving was just a part of a seasonal subsistence. Decoy carving was just like net hanging. You had to know how to hang net if you were going to have nets. You had to know how to build boats if you were going to have a boat, and that's why it was a decoy. I mean, that's the part. Luckily, this folk art has such a collector's value and such a potential for the future as an investment and such an appeal nationwide that we can use that market and that interest to help support preserving the culture.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
do you have specific things in mind that you think would help preserve the culture?
I think we're already doing that with the festival.
Right.
People come to the festival. Some come to buy ducks, some come to buy shirts, some come to eat, but everybody comes to be in the atmosphere. Because it is. The other wildlife shows that are up and down the East Coast have migrated and evolved into a big high dollar social event, and that's not what ours is, and we will fight it to the bitter end to keep it from becoming that, because here you're just as welcome if you've got $20 in your pocket as if you've got 20,000. And that's the way we feel about this museum. The $25 member is just as important as the person who comes in and buys a room for 100,000. And this is a struggle, and it's something that we are committed to, and I'd rather never build that museum than to sell out the big money. And that might be unrealistic, and it might be burying my head in the sand, but if that's the way it is, it'll just have to be the way it is. People are drawn. We went to Washington, D.C. last year, and we did a presentation for the Sportsman's Caucus of the Congress. We were there in the Rayburn House building. Jonathan, David, Jason, and I, we drug our fish boxes and our net butt and our old decoys. Those people understood what we were talking about. It wasn't glassed over, polished, spit shined, or any of that. And I think that's why our festival is successful. That's why people support what we're doing. It's because it's the real thing. And I think that's what was behind the cookbook. That's what behind the mailboat. And I think there has to be a balance in any preservation effort. There has to be academics. There has to be the finances. There has to be all those things. But when the local people fail to recognize themselves in what they're doing, then you've lost it all.
How do people in the local community feel about the museum?
They're supportive. They're not joiners, and we're getting ready to launch a membership drive, and we've got 800 members, and we've done that without trying.
Good size.
So we're hoping to have 2,000 members in the next 3 or 4 months, because there are so many people. I mean, we've got lists and lists of names who just haven't understood how important it is for their name to be on the roll. And that's, we've been advised not to do it this way, but we're going to do it this way. That we're going to start with our community first. They say in the big realm of fundraising, you go after the big money first, and then you let the community come in and do that last phase. But we're not, because we think it's more important that our community be a part of it than some major corporate sponsor. So that's our conviction, and we believe that's the way it needs to be.
And what drives that conviction?
Because the people who are leading it are people who are part of it. And it's about ownership. When the museum board put our general plan together, and we went back to a guild meeting and told them, this is what we're going to try to do. The only doubt and the only concern that came about with what we were trying to do was, oh, we don't want this to turn out like Easton, where you have to have monogrammed pants to get in. And that's our major struggle. And any struggles that we have had have all go back to that one fact.
Well, it's when you said that, something reverberated for me because it just seems like you're talking about ownership on a lot of different levels, not just the money, but also culture and sort of, whose culture is it and all of that.
The slogan that we're working on materials for our fundraising membership drive, and we're putting together a little booklet that's the story of the museum and the guild, and the theme of it is join the revival of an endangered species. And that's not just a species of an animal. We're a species. And I think that's what the festival has helped culminate. And now the museum on a year-round basis is reviving this culture. Several weeks ago, David Yeomans was down here. He had an interview with Jacksonville Daily about the lighthouse that the Lyns had been sent off to Rhode Island. And we sat around the kitchen table. There was.
Is it food?
It's food.
Okay.
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 We sat around the table and we talked about the Cape and the banks, the way we knew it. And we were trying to tell them what our attachment was to that lighthouse and our frustrations with the Park Service. And there was 6 or 7 of us, all were Harkers Island people, sitting around the table. And right in the middle of eating, David reached in his pocket and said, I got a poem I want to read. And the name of the poem was Neath Lookout Light. It's written by a local lady. And he read that poem, and we all cried. I mean, it was prayer meeting time. Like I told somebody, I thought to fly away. And I said that afternoon after it all cleared out, I said, I don't care if we ever build a building or not. This museum has done what it's supposed to do today. Because it has provided a place and a reason and a catalyst to reverberate those stories, to reinforce that common bond, to perpetuate and preserve and rekindle and do all those things.
Right.
Because if we don't, if Joel and Jonathan and David Yeomans and Mary Sue and Madge and all the people, if we don't keep it going, my youngest ain't gonna know what it's about.
Right.
And you don't learn that by going through and seeing an exhibit somewhere. You do that by living it. And when it comes to waterfowl heritage, the hunting clubs, the decoy making, the guides, and all the story, this festival, this museum is just as much a part of that history as building those hunting clubs.
Right.
We're making history. It's down east and decoying and waterfowling and traditional crafts in down east Carteret County are an evolving. It's not a story that began in such and such a year and ended in another year, because all of those things are still going on. And that's why this museum is important. It's not about the past, it's about right now too.
Yeah. We talked earlier about how cultural activism is in its own way a political act. I mean, how do you see what you're doing as having those kinds of ramifications?
Well, sometimes when I lay down at night, I say to myself, am I doing the right thing? Because I know that what's going on here, the festival, the cookbook already has, the museum will, more so than anything, bring more people to Harkers Island. Okay, and there are people who have concerns. We don't need anybody else coming on here. We're about to sing, Well,
About to sing. That's great.
My answer to that and my rationalization, and this is what I feel right now. I might feel different tomorrow, but what I feel right now is, as long as that bridge stands, and even if they take the bridge down, the word is out. People are going to come to Harkers Island. Down east is going to get developed. It is going to happen. Now, I can either sit back and cuss the moon and say, I don't want no part of it. Or I can get out there and I can fight for something that I recognize as being mine and being important. And I can use those dollar bills that come across that bridge to help preserve it for my crowd. I have not done, and I am not doing anything that I have done for the purpose of bringing anybody to Harkers Island. If it does, that's fine. And we've got to have the tourist industry to support what we're doing. Those are the facts. We have no choice. If I had a choice between tourism and the museum, if we got away with tourism, we wouldn't need the museum. You know what I mean? If there was no development, if there was no tourism, if there was no growth, if there was no progress, then it would be Harkers Island like I knew it in 1965. But as long as those facts remain, then that's going to happen. That's progress.
Right.
That is going to happen, whether I like it or not. Now, I can take two routes. I can stay home and do nothing, or I can get out there and figure out a way that the community of Harkers Island can benefit something out of it. And, I just got back from Ocracoke, and I look at how dependent that community is on those cars in New Jersey and Philadelphia and New York and all those places. And they're totally dependent on it. And nobody could afford to stay on Ocracoke even if they weren't there. Harkers Island might get to that point. I don't know. We're not that dependent on them right now.
Do you think that's likely to change in and around the museum or not?
I don't see the museum as... It depends on what happens to the rest of the community, how big the influx of the museum is going to be. Because if countywide sewage goes on and it turns to condo, there's no zoning on Harkers Island. That needs to be somebody else's campaign, because there needs to be some building ordinances and some zoning on this island before countywide sewage comes in. Because the only thing that's holding it back from major development right now is septic tanks. But if countywide sewage goes in and it all turns into condos and specialty shops and all that kind of stuff, the museum, I'm sure, will prosper from that. But that's not the purpose of the museum, is to bring any of that.
Right. But to counterbalance is...
Right. To me, the dollar bills are going to come over here, and somebody's going to be here to catch them. Whether it's a restaurant or a motel or a variety store or a gift shop. And why can't this group use that same resource instead of making... And people have asked me why don't you go get the store and open up your own gift shop? I could do that. And I feel like I could be successful because of what we've already done here. There's several buildings on the island that I've looked at that I could go run my mailboat and sell cookbooks and put up a gift shop and capitalize on. Last year we did $60,000 of business in the gift shop here. But I think this is bigger. I think this is more important. I think the community involvement in it. I think the class that.
Karen, hate to interrupt you, but Patsy is on line 1 asking about whether you want her to pick up Casey.
Okay, I'll pause this. So we were talking about the museum, and that you could obviously open a gift shop, and if that were
Right.
the motive. You said you were interested in something bigger, and I remember earlier when you were talking about the bazaar, about how you wanted to do something bigger and better. And to me, what I'm hearing is something bigger is part of this bigger picture of
Right.
your concern for the community here. Am I hearing you right? I mean, what does
Bigger.
something bigger mean to you?
Bigger is being a continued thing, I would say. Back to the bazaar, to me that was about pride. It was about, it didn't have anything to do with dollar bills. It was, okay, we did this. There's all kinds of benchmarks of success.
Right.
But the pride, and it explains in the introduction to the cookbook how we felt that morning.
Right.
And how, these were the things that our hands had made. And I don't think there had ever been a time before that we had taken those talents. And there is so much talent on Harkers Island. It doesn't matter if it's music, or if it's writing, or if it's poetry, or if it's paintings, or if it's just plain practical talent. There's so much talent here, and there had never been that much of Harkers Island's talent in one place. And the museum is a Dianese thing. It's not just Harkers Island. It is this whole Dianese culture of which Harkers Island is a part. And I see I see it as bigger than decoys because it includes the net hanging and the whole survival, the whole spirit, the whole attitude of I will not sell out to big money. I mean, and I threatened to quit if that's what we want to do. If we want to go out and do major corporate compromises,
Right.
for the my attitude is we are what we are, and we welcome anybody's money, anybody's support, their time, their resources, but don't come in and try to change us.
Right. Right.
I mean, we're going to have to. I understand that that's not all black and white, but when we lose the spirit and the community base of what we're doing here,
Right.
then we've lost it.
Right.
And bigger is also the festival is a 2-day event, and that's it. Bigger is a year round.
Mhm.
It is a base that my children's generation can build on.
Mhm.
It's got to be more permanent than
Right.
a 2-day event or a 3-day event.
Right.
You know, the festival I hope goes forever,
Mhm.
but there's no guarantee
Yeah.
that the festival syndrome will continue. I hope it will. I mean, it's been going for 20 or 30 years. There's
Right.
no reason for it not. We look at the school and we say there's a school population that's declining every year. What are we going to do with the festival if the county closes the school? Then we won't have a building. You know, there's a lot of great
Lots
unknowns.
of questions. Yeah.
And what we've got to make sure that is while everything is at its momentum and at its peak,
Right.
and there is a nationwide interest in waterfowling and environmental things, we've got to use that. That's a resource to me.
Right.
The public market,
Right.
the interest, the concern, the whole environmental issues, um, wildlife, and all that. I mean, there's just so many folk arts. You know, you can't pick up a
Right.
Decorator magazine on the newsstand that Better Homes and Gardens. There's always a decoy on the shelf. You know, it's
Right.
very popular right now. In 10 years, there'll probably be something else.
Right.
So we have to use that to make sure that there's something there for us as far as what this community is
Right. For
for
now and
for now and for later.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
bigger. I wish that. Bigger's not always better, and I don't
Right.
want to
Right.
translate
No,
that
but you're meaning I was hearing bigger as a broader
as a broader spectrum.
spectrum. Exactly. We're getting close to running out of the tape here. Maybe we could close with you just talking about what you feel about your role as a woman leader and what that's enabled you to bring to this whole effort. Is there anything unique about the fact that you're a woman doing this work?
I think I sweat the details more than men. I worry about how people feel about it. I think the sensitivity part.
Yeah.
And the sensitivity that's most, is the sensitivity of the local people. You know, I think probably a man in this position would just plow on, and I think it's important that the local people feel good about it. So I think the emotional part of it, it's an advantage being a female. I don't want people to get mad and go away, but if they have to, they have to, and I think I probably work harder to keep everybody happy than a man would. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other, I mean, just the details part of it.
Right.
The role that cooking has been in. I mean, we're kind of famous all over for
Right.
doing food stuff. You know, I think there are more women involved in this museum because I'm in it.
Interesting.
And some of our key people are women, are wives of the carvers or wives of the guild members. But we have, majority of our volunteers here are women. So women feel very safe and very needed and very wanted. So maybe that's an advantage. But I don't think me being female has discouraged any of the men from coming. You know.
Yeah.
So I think I have the respect of most of the people. A lot of them get disgusted with me because I don't give up. I just
Why don't you give up, Karen?
I don't- I
What
don't-
keeps you going?
I don't know. Like a good sense. I just think there have been times that I said that it's just not going to happen, but I don't let myself think about that. If I were to quit, it would not be because I did not believe that the potential was there or the need was there.